Hey everyone, Mark from TheGeekChurch. And, can you believe it? I'm the 4th episode of my show, and I don't show any signs of quitting. I thought I'd go for a different sort of look to this thing. Like I promised last week, I promised I was going to talk about stories I've written as well as abandoned concepts. So I just kept thinking, like, what am I going to do for a setup? I could probably just take the normal space where I do my videos, like my gadget reviews videos. I decided to opt for something different. Yeah, this is my bed, and yes, I'm filming this in my bedroom, but this isn't one of those type of videos. Go to OnlyFans if you want one of those. No, honestly, I think this is kind of appropriate because I have to say, like, even though that when I write a story or I'm writing anything, I'm in front of a computer, but oftentimes most of the work as far as actual story writing happens right before I'm trying to get to sleep, and I'm just sitting in bed just trying to get to sleep, and then I'll think of a story and then I'll just sort of work with it. And today I'm going to talk about 3 stories that I have published and you can read right now, and I'll put links in the descriptor on them. Then I'll talk about just things I've worked on, just fun that I had in my childhood. Yeah, some of you might remember I did a timeline in my first episode, which I really need to just re-upload. But in order to do that, I'd have to take a week off from doing this. But I really just don't want to do that. Actually, I'm wondering if I could, like, maybe I should put the stories that I've published at the end of the episode. That would make more sense chronologically, but you know what? Well, maybe I can edit it later. But I was actually kind of hoping I'd just get all the video footage now, and then all I gotta do is just put it all in a row and just edit it, put some subtitles in with some music, and call it good. Yes, my job is that easy. I almost said not there. Okay, so let's talk about 3 stories that I wrote for Hub Pages. Now, I'll just let you know what Hub Pages is. Hub Pages is this user-based content site that I needed to get some extra money back when I was a full-time freelance writer. Basically, here's the deal. You would go to Hub Pages, you'd submit something, and then they'd pay you a certain amount for it, and it usually wasn't that much. So on Hub Pages, I did a lot of gadget reviews there, but I also did a lot of video game strategy guides, and those actually got quite a bit of hits. It was enough to have them keep me there is the issue. However, Hub Pages kind of dwindled out as far as, actually, I think it's still around, but as far as like they weren't paying the writers, or at least that's what they told me, and I think they might have told me that because after a while I started submitting short stories to them in chapter forms. And since you were supposed to do like 15 Hub Pages posts per month, one month I decided to do a 15-part story, and that's where Dungeon Crackers was born. Okay, Dungeon Crackers I had published on Hub Pages in June 2010, which would make it about 13 years old at the time of this recording. Dungeon Crackers is a story that I don't know how I got the inspiration from it, but I always liked kind of fantasy stories, and I've always liked heist movies, and I thought I'd sort of combine the two. Now, in most fantasy stories and, say, video games, like, say, Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, which I'm doing a playthrough on the Gaming Church, by the way. Okay, quick promotion over. But essentially, most of these fantasy stories involve characters going through something like, well, a dungeon or a castle or something. They gotta get through a bunch of traps, they have to fight monsters in order to get some big treasure at the end. This is pretty much, this has been a standard of a lot of things, and you could pretty much base every Dungeons & Dragons campaign or gaming thing on this. Now, in Dungeon Crackers, my story is about a character whose name is kind of escaping me now, but he takes shortcuts. He's sort of a mercenary. He goes to somebody who wants the treasure that's in the dungeon, and what he does is he just makes a back door. He works with these characters that have magic items which allow him to get into the dungeon the easy way and bypassing a lot of things. And the story is that the main character works with a fairy who is actually male, which I think is kind of interesting. I decided to just kind of go for that, and has a pretty bad attitude. His name is Rolf, I think. And then he works with a troll, and he also works with a glamour. Now, a glamour is essentially this creature that looks different depending on who is looking at them. So basically, when you see this character, you will see like the person you love the most. Now, the story opens with the main character breaking into one of these dungeons, getting into a labyrinth, and then facing off with a dragon, and defeats it in a way that's rather unconventional, but I think sort of shows what Dungeon Crackers is all about. There's a theme in Dungeon Crackers that the world is sort of getting past its ability to be dependent on magic, and magical creatures are starting to die and stuff like that. Just to be warned on Dungeon Crackers, I want you to read it for sure, but it takes a pretty dark turn that even I was honestly surprised about. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Dungeon Crackers. There's another story I wrote in the month of August 2010 called Superhero Separation. Okay, 2010, I forget what was going on. We had the Marvel Cinematic Universe was kind of just starting, but basically, Superhero Separation has this setup of a family that is all has superpowers. It's kind of like The Incredibles, but a bit different. The father is called Particle Man, and yes, there's a theme to these superheroes. They're all named after, like, songs. I don't know why I went with that theme. Anyway, Particle Man has the ability to pretty much teleport anything, including himself. Particle Man is married to a woman named Daydream Believer, who has the power to essentially cast illusions. And they have 2 children. One of them is named Material Girl, and she has the power to basically kind of like, I think topography is probably the best word for this, but she can, if there's something around her like that's made of cement, she can reshape that cement to something. She can essentially reshape things, but she always has to use what is around there. She can't just change one thing to another. And then there's the main character of the story, whose name is Kodachrome, or at least that's a superhero name. He's got the power to change the color of any object or thing that's there, including the air. Okay, so there's no origin story for these characters. These superheroes, who honestly I forget the name of this team. I forget the name of this team. But essentially, they work for the government. And, occasionally they go on mission when there's a supervillain in town. So, here's the thing, though. The father and mother of this group, Daydream Believer and Particle Man, are getting a divorce. That's pretty much the basis of this story. And yes, it is based on my own experiences being a child of divorce. And I really don't want to get into that. To be honest, this story is probably how I really got into that. The story takes a turn when essentially the oldest daughter, Material Girl, decides that to bring her parents back together, she sets one of their greatest supervillains free. Now, this supervillain is honestly, I think, one of my greatest creations. His name is Massacre. What happened was, he definitely has an origin story. He actually figured out a way to cast a spell that made him immortal. But unfortunately, he got so bored with being immortal that now he craves death. So he looked at the spell that he cast and he discovered an escape clause in it that if the entire world were to be destroyed, he would in fact have death himself. So yeah, that's his motivation. He's pretty much the ultimate supervillain. And yeah. Okay, I'm not going to say anything more about this. If you want to read this story, you can. In all honesty, I was kind of... I don't really think the ending was very strong on this one, but I do recall a certain thing I wrote about it. which honestly showed that I still was working through a lot of the pain that you feel as a child of divorce. Okay, and the last project I did for Hub Pages was a story called Augmented, Superheroes of the Faith. I probably should have given a cringe warning on that, because this is a story that I wrote back when I was seriously into Christian stuff and stuff, but not as bad as I was like in the 90s. But yeah, I wrote this in 2010 in October, so again, it's 13 years old. But I definitely like the premise of this story, which is that it takes place like in some future era where superheroes are pretty commonplace. If you want superpowers, you just go and you get a procedure for them. And yes, I'm well aware that augmented often can be used synonymously with breast enlargement procedures. I didn't really know that but I just like the idea of using the word augment to describe this process. So yeah, don't hate me over that. Anyway, so what happens is, like, in this world where their superheroes are so commonplace, no one really believes in God anymore. So people are just sort of, most churches have been abandoned. Most people just don't really have any belief in anything supernatural, because now the supernatural is every day. So, yeah, it's kind of like that. So, within the story, this character gets superpowers, but not from the process. She actually gets that because of her belief in God, and essentially, I think her powers get triggered because if some superpowered foe comes against her, they will activate. But it's not like she can control them. Like I'm not really sure how this really works. Even when reading the Bible growing up, how some characters could do miracles. But it seemed like that they could only do miracles when God told them, okay, do a miracle now, or something like that. I mean, Jesus was doing them left and right, but that's a different story. Anyway, so the story is about this little girl and her grandfather who discover that she has superpowers. I think honestly, I don't really remember the story very well. I didn't really reread this before I did this. Anyway, if you want to read that story, it's on Hub Pages, link in the description. I suppose if you want to look at my works, you can always look at the CCF Nostalgia page, which I'll probably put a link in there too, what the heck. Because, yeah, I mean, again, cringe warning, because some of these stories I actually think have held up, but a lot of this stuff I feel like is not really my best work, but hey, at the time, it was. Okay, now we're going to talk about my early works. I don't really have a script for this particular thing. All I did was I took out some notebook and I just started writing about things that I used to write about way back when. And when I say way back when, I probably mean like up to kindergarten, honestly. I used to have this habit, and this is something I need to share with you, and the fact that we're in bed shows that this is pretty intimate. Because I'm going to share this in a way that I've shared with very few people. And most of these stories that I'm going to share here, I've never shared with anybody, honestly. So, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be so private of a person. Okay, I've mentioned before on a video that I'm on the autism spectrum, which means I've been on the autism spectrum all my life. However, I did not really know that, or I did not have that confirmed until I'm 50, my age now, or 51. So when I was a kid, I had a very peculiar habit that I don't really think anyone has had, and I don't even know if there's a name for it. Basically, I would watch something, like say Super Friends or Speed Racer. Those were some of the first TV shows I ever watched. And then what I would do when I was alone, I would run back and forth in whatever space I could find, say like my basement or something like that. And then I would sort of try and imagine my own scenarios here. One time I wanted to do this, and I didn't want my sister to watch, but she actually kind of saw me do it, and she called it chew 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 because I would make those kind of noises. And, basically, it's kind of embarrassing because I think everyone in my family knew I was doing this, but no one ever stepped in and no one ever stopped me doing this. And so, yeah. So yeah, I even find it hard to talk about it because honestly, it's weird. Okay, I mean, hey, as far as I know, I mean, it's not like I was with my friends and we were playing something and we were pretending or anything like that. This is something I did on my own, and uh, yeah, I didn't even really. I have to admit, I actually preferred being alone and stuff like that. I mean, I did occasionally, play with friends, but yeah, I actually preferred that kind of imagination where I was doing. Anyway, so this is where I think this is where I kind of became a writer, or sort of like this, even before I could really write stuff. Um, I would imagine myself. Uh, this is very common for do self-insert into fiction. I remember imagining myself with the Super Friends, imagining myself as kind of one of their members. I really liked having the idea of having magical powers. I really always loved that idea. Just because, yeah, yeah, I'll be very honest. Back when I was a kid, if I saw magicians, I remember one time we went to Busch Gardens and there was a magician there, and I just assumed, and think I was in like first grade, that he was doing real magic, and it was my sister who had to kind of basically say, no, it's all just a stage show. It's all a trick, and there were no books that were devoted to real magic. Most of the time, when I was looking at these books of magic trick, they always showed a trick, and they showed how the trick was done, and they showed how you could repeat it. And yeah, I was kind of fascinated by the fact that no, I really want to do this stuff. I really want to make magic happen. Anyway, I kind of didn't. Oftentimes, I would have to. Started doing these stories that were kind of derivative of what I was seeing on television. Say, for example, I remember creating this storyline where that takes place like in the very far future, where there's all the kinds of crazy monsters roaming around. And then there's a hero with magical powers whose name was Reuben Switch. And yeah, I got the name from pretty much, I think, two cartoons. One was there's a show called The Partridge Family in Outer Space. There was a character named Reuben on it. And then there was also The Trouble with Miss Switch, which was the story of a kid who discovers that his teacher is a witch. That was like an ABC after special or something like that. I don't know. I really like that story. Anyway, so I kept doing these kind of stories. There was one that I did that was kind of. I remember being really fascinated with Superman a lot and the powers of Superman. And I once created this kind of female character who was had Superman's powers, and I just called her Farrah Fawcett because that was a popular model at the time. And yeah, so I dreamed about this Farrah Fawcett character. Yeah, I know. You're probably thinking like, boy, this guy's really screwed up, and it's like, yeah, I'm on the autism spectrum, okay? Of course I'm screwed up, and I was undiagnosed. This stuff happened, but here's the thing. And I think a lot of this stuff for that whole Farrah Fawcett superhero kind of thing probably came from, the Superman movies, like the Christopher Reeve ones. I remember Superman 2. I saw that one. I really liked that one. So I guess I just wanted that hero. Then I really got into superheroes when I discovered comic books. I remember one year I was looking for a present to buy for my sister, so I bought her some comic books. And within these comics, there were a lot of things that we saw that we liked. She discovered the Teen Titans, which I don't think I even need to explain them. But I discovered this story, or this comic called Dial H for Hero. Now, Dial H for Hero essentially was this, at the time, it was this promo thing that DC Comics was using to essentially, they had writers for this thing, but they basically told people, you get to create the heroes. So the premise of this thing was that Christopher King and Victoria Grant, who are these two teenagers, had these power dials, and when they dialed HERO, and they were dials like rotary dials, they would become a superhero. And essentially the readers would submit the idea for the heroes, and they would submit the ideas for the villains. So they would just have that kind of setup. So I thought this was great, and I just thought like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. I submitted a hero to them called Ring Man, who basically had a lot of rings on his fingers, like he would push a button and like a giant buzzsaw would come out and stuff like that. There's actually a hero that Marvel has called the Mandarin, which has a very similar power, but I didn't know that at the time. Just to put a cap on Dial H for Hero, I did submit to them because in the comic there was a form you could cut out, and then you could. Here's the thing: they had a lot of weird things, like you could. They kept asking a lot of weird questions, like, "Hey, what are your pets? What are their names?" And it's like, I don't know why you would need to know that. Here's my hero submission and whatever. Now, Dial H for Hero, the one that where basically you create the hero, that pretty much filtered out in like 1983. It used to be, if you got the New Adventures of Superboy, there would be a Dial H for Hero story in the back. And the last story they had this one panel that had all these heroes there. And I get the feeling that was the writer's swan song send off to basically say, hey, you're not going to get your hero in here. And here it is. So I would love to say that maybe they got my submission and then use Ringman on there somewhere. I don't know. Because it's like, I didn't exactly draw a picture of this thing. I'm going to say this right now that I've kind of wanted to do comic books, but at the same time, I never could draw. So, yeah. Anyway, I bring this up because I just liked creating superheroes. I would just come up with a name and I would come up with a power, and that was it. I didn't care about personality. I didn't care about costume. I didn't know how to draw. So I would love to do this. I would just take heroes and I would just put them in one giant big group like the Justice League or the Avengers, and I'd have them fight some kind of villain or something like that. That was what I did. I never wrote this stuff down back then. This would have been like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Yeah, that was just that. Okay, after a while I started coming up with my own original ideas as far as for superheroes were concerned. And I remember this one concept I had. I didn't have like a name for this group, but I called them the Toy Gang, or at least like I'm calling them that now. But essentially, the premise was like they were a bunch of aliens that were essentially human-looking, or maybe and they had these flying skateboards they would ride, and then they had like these frisbees that they could they're kind of like the ones in Tron or something like that. And then the girls on the team like had these jump ropes, and then they could wield them like these kind of lightsaber nunchucks kind of thing. I remember always having them fight in these canyons. I guess I just like that idea. Crazy stuff like that. I don't remember them having any plots to this particular thing. And I remember the group being very large, and I think I just based every character just on somebody I knew in school. I also remember being kind of into horror or something like that. Here's the thing, though. I didn't watch horror movies. I was scared to death of them. But I would write stories where things like I remember writing this one story about a person whose mind was possessed by a computer, and I think I even called it like Exorcist 3 The Possession. This is back before Exorcist 3 existed, but essentially, I mean, I never even watched The Exorcist. I was too scared to watch that movie because I remember it being on television. I just didn't want to watch that. But I like the idea of just maybe of stuff like this. I was always kind of thinking about stuff like that. I remember one creation I had about this, maybe an alien or something from another dimension, that they had this artificial arm and it could stretch, and the arm had like a jet in it so he could fly. I don't even remember what I called this character, if I called him anything at all, but yeah, it was just crazy stuff. I even remembered like me making a story about him where he's trying to get one of every single element, because at the time I was kind of fascinated with the periodic table of the elements. Yeah, it was weird, okay? Okay, in 7th grade, I decided to get this weird idea where I was going to write my stories down. I actually think there was some sort of contest at my school that you could enter a story. So I wrote my first story. And actually, that's not really true. I mean, generally in class or in school, we would have creative writing assignments, and I found that I would just really get into it. I just would really just make up just crap and stuff like that, just because I would just love doing it. I'd just take these ideas that I got from the TV shows that I was watching, and I would just try and put my own spin on them. Okay, so the big change came in 7th grade when I started writing my own story. I don't even remember the title of the story. I don't remember. I think I remember the main character was named Mike Harker, which is probably some weird derivation of my own name. But essentially, like Mike led this group of super, not superheroes, but they were. He was like an alien. But he had a group of people, and each of this persons in the group had a different power. Like one person had like a special gun, one person could do like acrobatic stuff. One person was a genius, and they were all girls. I don't know why. I was just kind of, I guess, hey, I was in 7th grade. Okay, I was really starting to like girls now, so I guess I like the idea that I was leading a team full of girls or something like that. I will not. I definitely don't want to say that this character wasn't some sort of wish fulfillment that I was going with. Okay. Anyway, so the basic premise of this story is that Mike is in a spaceship. He's kind of on the run from these aliens, and I think he wants to just take over planet Earth. Yeah, he's apparently the villain of this story, or at least starts out being the villain of this story. And so he lands in this place that's a summer camp that's based on a summer camp that I went to. And he meets a girl and falls for her because in the first chapter, his girlfriend, who was one of the girls on his girl team, gets killed. And yeah, and that's pretty much, and that's kind of where it begins. So the aliens, I think I called the Garonians, and they were just based on some alien thing that I saw in a comic. They were basically kind of the V aliens, if you've ever watched the show V. And there's a big giant action set piece where they fight these guys off at the summer camp and all. And I actually thought that this might make a good series. That it's basically him sort of Mike discovering Earth and getting settled on Earth with his team, and then discovering that he could help save them from this incoming threat. That's actually the most interesting thing in this story that you could even take away from it, honestly. And there's this next story, and I don't even know if it's the next story. I actually forgot what order I thought of these things in, but I'm very certain that one with Mike Harker and his girl team, that was the first. So basically, this is like a story that my sister called Looking for My Alien Buddy, because oftentimes I would share these stories with my sister. And I started writing this one, and this is basically this is a story of a group of people who are all unique in some way. There's this one guy who helped stop the war between U.S. and Russia, because that was often a theme that I dealt with. This is, of course, during the 80s when I wrote these stories. I probably should have mentioned that. This would have been 1984, 1985. We were still into that whole Cold War sort of thing. I think I only completed the first chapter of the story, which had, I guess, the main character, but one of several uh, one of several characters in this, who is essentially this guy who sneaks into Russia and with a nuclear bomb and destroys their home base, therefore winning the war, I guess. And he's chosen for this team. I think basically the premise of the story was the world was at so much war at the time that essentially we're just humanity wanted to have this mission to find a friend in space. And so that's why my sister called it Looking for My Alien Buddy. It's an interesting premise, I guess, but I mean, after all, Star Trek, they were always looking through the galaxy, but they never really had the set agenda, we're going to find a friend here. Mine had that. Anyway, so this team had a ship, they had a commander sort of figure, and they had this one character on there who's essentially just Jean Grey, really. It just had these massive powers or something like that. I don't even remember the origin of that character. Maybe I just wanted a Phoenix Jean Grey type character on this thing. I don't know. Okay, and then I remember writing this one story about a guy who basically exists. He lives in a world where space travel has, we found planets and it's got that kind of setup. So one day he discovers a planet that no one's discovered, but he doesn't have a starship. He has no way of getting there. So he devises a plan to essentially hijack a starship and take it there. In all honesty, this character's a real a-hole. So maybe he was one of the worst parts of me. But essentially, this guy would do this. And I actually believe that I had in this story that the ship that he hijacks is actually owned by this married couple, and sometime during this whole action goes out, the husband dies, so he just marries the wife or something like that. Just something pretty awful if you really think about it. I must have had a lot of action set pieces in this story, but I don't remember a single darn one of them. It's kind of weird that, but I'm kind of glad because honestly, this is a dumb idea, so this is why it was abandoned. I think when I'm talking about a lot of these abandoned ideas, you're probably going to figure out why that I never went into more detail on them. Oh my gosh, then I decided to turn my attention to my magnum opus great epic sci-fi story, Crisis Over Crystal. Oh yeah, it's got a title and everything. And it has a main character whose name is Call. Yeah, that rhymes with Paul, who is the main character in Dune, if you're not familiar with that. And I stole a lot from Dune in this thing, and I stole a lot from something else, and it'll be very obvious once I describe the plot line. Anyway, Call has a girlfriend named Menshire, who is serving on military duty on another planet. And one day, a bad guy named the Viscount comes in and destroys the king, and he's looking for essentially this great crystal which can allow you to turn any object into any other object. Yeah, this is kind of a thing that exists in these stories. So Menshire sends a word of help to Call, and so Call responds, but he has to go to this nearby town to find a renegade pilot, and they go to save Menshire. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it ought to be. It's just pretty much Star Wars A New Hope. And yeah, I think I might have just rented that one night and just watched it and tried to come up with my own kind of space opera realistic kind of story here. Okay, maybe not realistic, but I always liked the world building that Star Wars did. And I had mentioned before that it is my favorite film. Okay, for some reason I never tried to write a story after that, or at least, actually that isn't true. I actually did quite try and write a few things. I always had like these, remember I said like I did the choo 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 thing? I had a lot of things I was kind of working with this one summer. I once had this idea for a story called Glacier, which takes place in a future ice age. And honestly, there's actually kind of some interesting things you could kind of do with that. Of course, I found out that an ice age doesn't happen like overnight, so it's not like in the day after tomorrow or something like that. But here, I think I was definitely inspired by Mad Max because I wanted this. I had this idea that in the ice age it was ruled by some guy who I called Crime Wave. Yeah, seriously, I think I was getting my superhero stuff bleeding in there. And then there was like, I remember I had one character named Roller, who was this guy who had ice skates, and he had this staff on his back that he could snap on like little things like a hammer or a gun or something like that. I like the idea of that. There's some of these stories I think I just had ideas and I just tried to work them into something that was feasible and had a plot line. But sometimes you just have a neat idea, man. Okay, then I had this great idea for a hero that was an artist, and yeah, I don't know, he just I think I had this great idea for us. I think I liked this show, or I liked Indiana Jones. I liked Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom. And I always thought it'd be a great idea to just have a hero that wasn't an archaeologist, but was an artist. Yeah, that was the premise. So yeah, you would go and do things, and there's not really much I could do with that. I think the strangest thing that I had were that a lot of these things were series. Like I actually could think of like not just one adventure, but multiple adventures. I had this one idea. I don't really remember if I called this team anything, but I liked watching stories like about World War II or soldier stories, the ones that glorified war and stuff like that. And I had this idea of a group of teenagers that during World War II they actually go over to Europe and they're fighting, and they have these weapons that are special, like. One of them has this gun that can shoot razor blades, like a machine gun, shoots bullets. And I don't know. don't really remember any specific adventures I had planned on them. I remember, I think, having this idea that they were being, I don't know, besieged in a bike shop, so they make it out by building an airplane out of the bike parts, kind of like the Wright brothers. I always thought that was kind of a cool idea. The stories would have been like that. And I think I actually, for one assignment in creative writing in 8th grade, I think I actually wrote one of their adventures, but yeah, nothing ever stuck. I had this one idea that it was called the Disaster Masters. It was just about a group of people led by a very charismatic man named John Scott. And he was the first time I really created a character that I felt was very unique. Now, John Scott lives in a world where essentially he loves technology. He tries to create flying cars. He tries to create all these great inventions to help out humanity. And he specifically is targeting natural disasters. So he creates these like ways to destroy tornadoes, and he creates this really cool gun that can, like, if you shoot it, it'll create a hole in the ground that you can jump into to take shelter from a tornado or something like that. The stories got really wild. I remember one adventure where they are experimenting in a jet and they go back in time to the 1906 earthquake of San Francisco, and I mean, none of this could actually, the stories got way too far out as far as a couple of guys who are just fighting natural disasters who feel like they're like the Ghostbusters, apparently, or something like that. I don't know. Okay, and then I remember there's this one story that actually had a title called The Base Besieged. This story is forever lost. I'm pretty sure I typed it out on a DOS computer and saved it on PFS Write, and it is gone. It is probably on some... If the disc is around, it's probably in my mom's disc somewhere, and I think that discs don't save information, so... Anyway, The Base Besieged was an interesting story I had. Again, I think I told you I was very fascinated by Cold War, stuff like that. If you grew up in the 80s, you grew up with a shadow of the fear of nuclear war, and that's rides you pretty hard. So essentially, the story is about this man who is assigned to a U.S. base in Antarctica, which has nuclear missiles in it. Yeah, I know. I'm pretty sure that we never had bases in Antarctica that had nuclear missiles in them. But hey, I didn't know that. Anyway, so this guy who's at the space, he befriends the general, the leader in command. He has a daughter, and they become friends. And then one day, the base is besieged by these terrorists who are trying to essentially eradicate all nuclear weapons. And they're basically saying, like, hey, I think they give an ultimatum, like, you need to have a complete nuclear freeze or we start killing these people here. From there, I think the plot becomes pretty much Die Hard, and I think I actually wrote this story before Die Hard even existed, so I guess I was ahead of my time, maybe? But, yeah, at the end, there's this great scene that where they fight where the terrorists and the good guys fight on this jet that can pretty much do anything. Like, it can go and fly into space, it can fly and go underwater, and there's a big action set piece there. And honestly, I love doing action set pieces. I think part of that was with the aforementioned shoot, shoot, shoot thing I was always doing. Action was always a big part of it. Then there was this one idea let's just call 5 authors on a special quest, because, I mean, I never really I had this idea of, I was really big into reading science fiction and fantasy, so I had this idea that what if I took like 5 of my favorite authors and I had them on a quest together. And so there was one guy who was into there was like a funny guy who was into I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I even used real world authors for this, but maybe I just made up some or something like that. And for some reason, they go through a real dungeon. I have no idea what a setup that was, or I have no idea how I got them there. I don't think I ever thought ahead that far. So, yeah, that was a quickly abandoned concept. Then, of course, there's this one idea I had that was clearly inspired by George Orwell's 1984, which I tried to read back then, and the X-Men, where essentially there's this dystopian future where essentially these people that have psychic powers are being hunted down because they're psychics and people fear them. This is a very old concept. There's really nothing new that I really could bring to the table here. I did like that I did create this interesting character named Tendril. And Tendril was this character who was a member of a rock band who had every joint replaced with metallic, with essentially metal. So they were definitely a cyborg. Not only that, Tendril had these special optical eyes that would cause her to see things in just such a beautiful way. I really didn't. I like the idea. Sometimes when you do this stuff, you end up just getting something good out of it. But I never really was able to use Tendril in anything else. Maybe I'll find a use for it later. That's the thing I want to bring up for this. That's why I'm bringing this up about abandoned ideas, because a lot of these abandoned ideas had something in them that I used in some derivative form elsewhere. Anyway, I had this one idea that was really strange about this guy that, like a 8th grader, which maybe 10th grader, whatever age I was back then, but he wanders into this other dimension where essentially that's taken over by a dictator who keeps everyone in their homes and has them just by having them watch TV all day. And essentially, you could probably say, like, well, that's obviously symbolic of, yeah, it is. I think that there is kind of, I think the point of this story was a lot of symbolism. But anyway, and the television he's somehow getting from Earth somehow and just beaming it to these other people, and this guy had this army of like these guys that would ride these mechanical beasts that honestly I think I just had a thing about having mechanical beasts and stuff like that. I just thought that was really cool. Yeah, I really like the show Transformers back then. I actually had the story about these astronauts in the space shuttle who meet a race that are kind of like Transformers, like 20 or so of these robots that could form like into one big robot. And I don't know what I ever wanted to do with that, but I like the idea of just having people in space, realistic astronauts meeting something that was just very fantastical. I like that idea. And then I had this one idea that was, I mentioned earlier that I was kind of into horror, but even then I still, there were things that I kept my distance from because horror to me was scary, and I had a lot of nightmares as a kid. I didn't want more added to them. So, but I did have this one story about essentially where hell starts to erupt from Earth, and essentially the premise is that these characters have to stop it from happening. And this was a huge horror epic. I never really wrote down the particulars, but I had very much things set up for it. For example, I had this idea that these characters have to find this giant pool full of holy water or something like that, and they take the holy water in squirt guns and they storm the gates of hell, and they are actually taking out demons by squirting them with this holy water from their squirt guns. I even have this one scene where this guy's about to take out a demon with a squirt gun, but the demon like breathes fire and just blasts his squirt gun, but the guy still has some of the holy water in his hand, so he does this, the flicky thing, and then it takes out the demon because even a drop of holy water can do it. Oh my gosh, this is just horrid. Alright, okay. I had a lot of ideas like this. Like, I had this great idea. I think I watched the show Thundercats, and I had this idea that I could create my own kind of anthropomorphic characters. I tried to draw them, and even anthropomorphic characters are hard to draw. So for me, being in comics, just wasn't happening. At least on the level where I could draw these guys, because honestly, I just wasn't really that good at drawing. I'll tell you that much. So, at this during time, I really got my attention back on superheroes. I started reading this book series known as Wild Cards, and this is a book that was designed for adults. I know that. It was edited by George R. R. Martin. I think we all know what George R. R. Martin is known for today. But this was a book series that was full of these, essentially where an alien bomb gets exploded on Earth, so as a result some people get superpowers. And I kind of created my own idea of what this would be like, and I created my own characters that live in this world. Now, honestly, I have to say, like, I don't want to talk about any stories that go into fan fiction or self-inserts, because I've already mentioned that, and I could go into quite a few stories that I wrote that were based on already existing intellectual property. I don't think I better talk about this one here, but I'll bring it up so I can bring up something later on. Okay, there was one story that I did write down for sure. That honestly, maybe I should have tried to get it published. Who knows? It was called "This Isn't Your Life," and the story was about a guy who was essentially who kind of gets bullied, and he has this one day where these bullies get him after school, and he decides to. He has the technology to do essentially kind of like a virtual reality machine, where or something like that, where he can play out a scene from his life. He tells the computer what it was like, and then he can play out the scene, and he can do things differently in the scene. And so essentially he lives this imagined. So he has one day where he lives his bad life, then he goes into this one world and he lives a completely different life. I like the idea of this story, and this was before virtual reality was ever a thing, or was ever even named. So hey, I guess I was ahead of my time. But the technology I'm talking about isn't exactly virtual reality. The thing I remember most about this story was it ends with basically the main character interfaces with a computer to help him generate these environments. But the thing is, the technology is so good you can't even tell whether in the real world or the virtual world. So this computer actually tricks the main character into thinking he's in the virtual world, so he is more cocky in the real world. And then, but then it ends up being really bad for him. And then he ends up just kind of pulling the plug on this computer, and that's kind of the end of the story. Now, actually, it's kind of funny because I remember I had a friend at the time who was in this creative writing class with me, and I gave him the story, and he reads it, and he said I didn't like the ending, and it's like, and I guess he wanted a happier ending, so I wrote a happier ending, and in the happy ending, he actually gets together with this girl that he likes, and that's kind of that. I can't tell if I would have to actually see both versions of the stories to know which one I would actually go with now. I don't know. Okay, I want to wrap this up really quick with 4 stories that I wrote in college, because at the time I had gotten into Christianity and Christ and stuff like that, and I probably should have held up 4 stories before. Anyway, oh boy, so a lot of Christian cringe is going to happen, so just be prepared for it. Okay, first there was Eternity Transcends Time. This is about a man who develops time travel and then goes back to the time of Jesus so he can see the whole crucifixion thing, but his friend, who is not a believer, intends to prevent the crucifixion. Oh my gosh. You know what's really funny? There's actually a very modern day, I think, time traveling film out now called Assassination 33 AD, which kind of has very similar things going on here. But yeah, this is crazy. I actually... Oh my god. Okay, I better not get into that. It's just a crazy concept. That's just what that is. Oh yeah, then there's the story called The God Runner, which takes place in a big spaceship in the future where the end times is about to happen, and these one group of Christians help out the other people who are not Christians on this ship. Oh my gosh! Oh man! Oh, thank God I never tried to publish this. But honestly, I actually had an idea of what the cover would look like, man. So, I guess I wrote it down somewhere, so, and it exists. And then I remember this one story called Haman's Revenge, and essentially the story is the Book of Esther, told sort of in a modern day point of view, with a character who wants to kill all the poor using plague rats. Honestly, I kind of like the premise of the story. I think there's a lot that could be done here, but out of all the ones, I'm not laughing at this one. And I'm looking at some of the other stories I wrote, and honestly, I'm getting so much cringe factor here, I'm not even going to go on with it. So I think I better wrap this up here. I think the big question is, why do I bring this up? Well, here's the thing. I put a lot of work into these stories. It may not look like it, but at the time, I actually think that these stories kept me going. There's one more thing I could talk about during my high school years and my early college years, and that was an idea I had for a group of superheroes, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Because I think I actually want to do an entire episode devoted to this, but it won't be the next episode. And honestly, I'm kind of hoping to write it one day in a book and detail what was happening. And if I do write about that, a lot of the stuff is going to be about how these stories really inspired me, but they also kept me going. Life is kind of difficult sometimes, and it was often easy. I mentioned about divorce, and I mentioned about a lot of other things. A lot of times it was just easier to create a world that I would want to actually live in, even though it had its share of problems. It was just kind of easier that way. What else can I say? So yeah, I mean, I realize I'm not the only one who's like this, who has these great ideas and just they don't really know what to do with them, and that's pretty, I hope that's normal. I don't know how other people live. I don't know if you chew or whatever. I hope that everyone did or had some sort of a way that they could express themselves somehow. And even then, I couldn't really express myself. I didn't really tell anybody about these stories that I was writing and stuff like that. And hey, maybe I should have. Maybe if people would have laughed at me, well, at least I would have been honest. That's probably why I kept these under wraps. Some of these things I'm laughing at even right now. But, yeah. But, hey, the thing is, you can always find circles of people who want to believe what you believe. That's kind of just how that works. Okay, you know what? I was going to bring up some other stories I've written, but... Jeez. Okay, I think I've gone long enough here on this. Maybe I'll have a part 2 for this, because honestly, when I was writing down these things, I would often wake up at night and go like, oh shoot, I forgot about this particular thing, or I forgot about this thing. Something tells me I'm going to have a lot of these, and if this is a big enough hit, yeah, I'll write a sequel to this. I could probably, with what I left behind here. Anyway, I think you'll be very much entertained by the stories that I did get published on Hub Pages, so go to the description and read those if you haven't read them, and I hope you like them, because I think some of those are kind of my are good works. Maybe not my best work, but I think my best works are yet to come. Next week, next week I'm going to do a very special episode. I realize most people wait quite a while before they do the very special episode, but I'm going to do this one because it's kind of been on my mind lately. I'm going to do an episode about bullying. I'm going to talk about how I was bullied, and I'm going to be talking about how I bullied. I'm going to leave out any names and stuff like that, but I think you guys probably can figure out who I am if you really wanted to, and you guys can probably track down where these stories came from and who are the people in this thing. But my purpose isn't, I'm not trying to my purpose in doing my next show isn't to like, hey, you bullied me and I'm pissed off about it. My thing is like, I'm trying to really get to the heart of the issue. And it's going to be a very big, heavy episode. And I'm going to put the trigger warnings there. I haven't decided how I want to do it. I definitely do want to have a script that I want to write on this. But hey, that's kind of next week's problem. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Mark from The Geek Church, and I'm signing off.